Where are you watching this from? If you've ever had someone in power try to reduce you to nothing, you know the kind of pain I'm talking about. The kind that simmers quietly at first, then burns. If you're new here and this channel brings you clarity, understanding, or even peace, hit that subscribe button. Let's uncover the psychology of revenge, the art of reclaiming power, and how I turned an insult into justice. They say revenge is a dish best served cold, but what they don't tell you is that the coldest dish takes years to prepare. It requires perfect timing and demands a level of patience that most people simply don't possess. Marcus Chen was my mentor, my role model, and eventually, my biggest mistake. Marcus had a reputation for being demanding, perfectionist, and uncompromising in his pursuit of academic excellence. What I didn't know was that demanding was just his public face, the mask he wore for colleagues and administrators. It started small, as these things always do. Comments about my work being adequate but uninspired, delivered with a smile that never reached his eyes. Little jokes about how some people just aren't built for the pressure of real research, delivered in front of other students to maximize the humiliation. I told myself it was just his teaching style, that he was one of those professors who believed in tough love. But then came the day that changed everything. The day that would define the next 3 years of my life. I had spent 8 months working on a groundbreaking study about manipulation in workplace hierarchies. It was going to be my dissertation, my ticket to a real career in psychology, my chance to make a meaningful contribution to the field. The research was solid, the data was clean, and the implications were revolutionary. I was so excited when I presented it to Marcus, so proud of what I had accomplished. Interesting work, he said, barely looking up from his coffee, his tone suggesting it was anything but interesting. Though I think it needs some refinement before it's ready for publication. I nodded eagerly, ready to incorporate his feedback. What kind of refinement? He smiled, that cold smile I'd learned to fear over the past 3 years. Well, for starters, your name shouldn't be on it. I felt the blood drain from my face, my hands going numb as his words sank in. I'm sorry, what? This research was conducted in my lab, using my resources under my supervision, he said matter-of-factly. Academically speaking, this is my work. You were just the research assistant who helped gather the data. I stared at him, unable to process what I was hearing, my brain refusing to accept this reality. Marcus, this was my idea, my research question, my methodology, my analysis. I've been working on this for almost a year. He leaned back in his chair, studying me like I was one of his lab subjects, a specimen to be analyzed and categorized. Sarah, let me explain something to you about how the real world works, he said, his voice taking on the patronizing tone I'd come to despise. You're a good student, but you're not researcher material. You don't have the instincts, the creativity, or frankly, the intelligence for original work. What you do have is the ability to follow instructions. Well, that's valuable, but it's not the same as being capable of independent thought. The words hit me like physical blows, each one carefully chosen to inflict maximum damage. You think I'm not intelligent enough for this work? He actually laughed, a sound that would haunt my dreams for months to come. Sarah, you're adequate. That's not an insult, it's just reality. Most people are adequate, but breakthrough research requires something more. It requires vision, intuition, the ability to see patterns that others miss. You're a good assistant, but you'll never be more than that. I felt something crack inside my chest, not my heart, something deeper, something that had believed in fairness, in merit, in the idea that hard work and intelligence would be rewarded. So you're just taking my work? I'm giving your work the attention it deserves, he corrected, as if he were doing me a favor. Under my name, it will be published in a top-tier journal. Under yours, it would be ignored. You should be thanking me. I stood up slowly, my legs unsteady, the room spinning around me. And if I refuse? His expression didn't change, but something cold flickered in his eyes, something predatory and dangerous. Then you'll find that academic careers are very fragile things. Recommendations can be withdrawn, funding can disappear, opportunities can evaporate. You're a bright girl, Sarah. I'm sure you understand the implications. I left his office that day knowing my life had fundamentally changed. Not just my career, my entire understanding of how the world worked. I had believed in justice, in fairness, in the idea that good work would be recognized and rewarded. Marcus had shown me that I was naive, that the world was ruled by people like him, who took what they wanted and destroyed anyone who got in their way. But Marcus had made one crucial error in his assessment of me. He was right that I was intelligent. What he failed to recognize was that my intelligence came with something else: patience, and a very, very long memory. The first thing I did was document everything. Every email, every conversation, every piece of research I had conducted. I created backups of backups, stored in locations Marcus would never think to look. Then I started my real education, not in psychology in Marcus Chen. I studied him the way he had taught me to study human behavior. I learned his patterns, his weaknesses, his secrets. And Marcus had so many secrets. So many skeletons in his perfectly organized closet. The falsified data in his 2019 study that had launched his career and made his reputation. The graduate student he'd had an affair with, who'd mysteriously transferred schools after threatening to report him. The grant money he'd diverted for personal use. Marcus Chen wasn't just a brilliant researcher. He was a predator who had built his entire career on the work and suffering of others. And I was going to be his final lesson in human behavior. The beauty of studying psychology is that you learn exactly how people's minds work under pressure. You understand their triggers, their blind spots, their breaking points. Marcus had spent 3 years teaching me these lessons, never realizing he was creating his own destroyer. Now it was time for his final exam. I started with his marriage, because that's where he was most vulnerable. Marcus's wife, Linda, was a lovely woman who genuinely believed her husband was the brilliant, ethical researcher he pretended to be. She had no idea about his affairs, his academic fraud, or his habit of destroying students' careers for sport. But Linda was also a forensic accountant, which made her very, very good at finding financial irregularities. All it took was an anonymous tip to the right person about some suspicious charges on the university credit card. Just a suggestion that maybe someone should look into whether Professor Chen's research trips to conferences were actually research trips. Linda was thorough, meticulous, and absolutely relentless when she caught the scent of financial impropriety. Within 2 weeks, she had uncovered not just the affairs, but the financial fraud, the fabricated expenses, and the grant money that had somehow found its way into Marcus's personal accounts. The divorce papers were filed on a Tuesday. By Thursday, the university had launched a formal investigation. By Friday, Marcus's world was falling apart. Marcus came to me that Friday afternoon, desperate and panicked, his usual composure completely shattered. "Sarah, I need your help." I looked up from my desk where I was working on a new research proposal. A legitimate one this time, that would actually have my name on it. "With what?" "Linda's trying to destroy me. She's making up stories, claiming I've been embezzling funds. You know how vindictive women can be when they're hurt." I nodded sympathetically, playing the role of the concerned student. "That sounds awful. What kind of evidence does she have?" He ran his hands through his hair, his perfectly styled appearance disheveled for the first time since I'd known him. "That's the thing, she seems to have documentation for everything. Receipts, credit card statements, even some emails I don't remember sending. It's like someone's been feeding her information." "Wow, that's really strange. Who would do something like that?" Marcus looked at me carefully, his analytical mind finally working on the right problem. For just a moment, I thought he might have figured it out, might have seen through my innocent act. "I don't know, but I'm going to find out. In the meantime, I need you to help me with damage control. You could testify that you've never seen any irregularities in my research practices." I tilted my head, considering his request with apparent seriousness. "Marcus, I'd love to help, but I'm not sure that would be entirely honest." His face went pale, the color draining from his cheeks like water from a broken dam. "What do you mean?" "Well, there was that time you had me falsify the data in the Morrison study, and the incident with Jennifer's research that you published under your name. Oh, and the grants you've been using for personal expenses." I've always been very observant. Marcus stared at me like he was seeing me for the first time, like the mask had finally fallen away. "You wouldn't dare." I smiled pleasantly, the same smile I'd given him 1,000 times before. "Wouldn't dare what?" "Tell the truth." "Marcus, you taught me that integrity is the foundation of good research. I'm just applying your lessons." He leaned across my desk, his voice dropping to a whisper, his eyes wild with panic and rage. "You have no idea what you're playing with, Sarah. I can destroy you with a single phone call. Every graduate program, every potential job, every reference you'll ever need, I control all of it." "Actually," I said, opening my laptop with deliberate slowness, "I don't think you do anymore." I turned the screen toward him, watching his face crumble as he read the email. On it was a message from Dr. Patricia Williams, the department head, formally announcing that Marcus Chen had been placed on administrative leave, pending a full investigation into allegations of academic misconduct and financial fraud. "It looks like your influence isn't quite what it used to be." Marcus's hands were shaking now, his entire body trembling with the realization of how completely his world had changed. "This is temporary. These investigations never amount to anything. In 6 months, this will all blow over, and then you'll learn what real consequences look like." "Maybe," I agreed, my voice calm and steady. "Or maybe this is just the beginning." I was right. It was just the beginning. The university investigation led to a federal audit of Marcus's research grants. The federal audit uncovered tax evasion spanning multiple years. The tax evasion investigation revealed a pattern of fraud that went back 8 years. Each revelation led to the next, like dominoes falling in a carefully planned sequence, each one triggering the next collapse. And through it all, I watched Marcus's life unravel with the same clinical detachment he had taught me to use when observing human subjects. His wife left him, taking half his assets and his children, who would grow up knowing their father as a fraud. The university fired him and demanded restitution for the misused funds, threatening legal action if he didn't comply. The academic journals began retracting his papers, erasing years of work from the official record. The professional associations revoked his memberships, cutting him off from his peer network. Because Marcus had made this personal when he called me worthless, when he stole my work and tried to convince me I was too stupid to succeed. And personal attacks require personal consequences. I had learned something important about Marcus during my 3 years under his mentorship. He was deeply, pathologically afraid of being seen as ordinary, as just another person struggling to make their way in the world. His entire identity was built around being exceptional, being brilliant, being better than everyone else, which gave me the perfect way to destroy him completely. I started a blog, nothing fancy, just a simple academic blog about research ethics and the psychology of narcissism in academic settings. That would have been unprofessional, and I was always professional. Instead, I wrote detailed case studies about Professor X, a brilliant but deeply flawed researcher who had built his career on exploitation and fraud. I described his methods, his personality, his tactics for manipulating students and colleagues. I analyzed his psychological profile with the same precision he had taught me to use in my research. The blog went viral in academic circles, shared by professors and students who recognized the patterns I was describing. Everyone in psychology knew exactly who Professor X was, but the analysis was so thorough, so clinically devastating, that it became required reading in graduate ethics courses. His name became synonymous with everything wrong with academic power structures. But the blog was just phase 1 of my plan. Phase 2 was much more personal, much more targeted. You see, I had learned something else about Marcus during those 3 years of careful observation. He was absolutely terrified of being poor, of returning to the economic circumstances of his childhood. He had grown up in poverty, and his entire adult life had been a desperate flight from that background. The expensive house, the luxury car, the designer clothes, they weren't just status symbols. They were armor against his deepest fears, protection against the shame of his origins. So I made sure he lost all of it, piece by piece, watching him slide back into the poverty he'd spent his life escaping. The university demanded restitution for the misused grant money, a sum that ran into the hundreds of thousands. The IRS wanted their back taxes, plus penalties and interest that had been accumulating for years. Linda's divorce settlement took half of what remained, leaving him with barely enough to survive. The legal fees from fighting multiple investigations consumed the rest, bleeding him dry. Within a year, Marcus was not just unemployed and unemployable in his field. He was broke, facing bankruptcy, watching everything he'd built crumble around him. The foreclosure notice went up on his house on a Tuesday morning in March. I happened to be driving by purely by coincidence, of course. When the sheriff's deputies were posting the papers, Marcus was standing on his front lawn, still in his pajamas, holding a cup of coffee and staring at the notice like he couldn't quite believe it was real. For just a moment, I felt something that might have been pity, a flicker of sympathy for this broken man. This broken man in his bathrobe was a far cry from the confident professor who had stolen my work and called me worthless. But then I remembered his smile when he told me I'd never amount to anything. I remembered the casual cruelty in his voice when he explained that I should be grateful he was stealing my research. I remembered every student he had crushed, every career he had destroyed, every life he had damaged, in service of his own ego. And the pity disappeared, replaced by a cold satisfaction. I pulled over and rolled down my window, calling out to him, "Marcus?" He turned, and for a moment he didn't recognize me, his mind struggling to place my face. I looked different now, more confident, more polished, more successful. "Success suits me, Sarah?" His voice was hoarse, uncertain, like he couldn't quite believe I was really there. "I heard about your situation. I'm sorry things have been so difficult for you." He stared at me, and I could see the wheels turning in his head. The same analytical mind that had made him such a brilliant researcher finally working on the right problem. "It was you." His voice was barely a whisper, filled with the dawning realization of how completely he'd been outmaneuvered. "I'm sorry? All of this? The investigation, the audit, the blog, Linda finding out about everything. It was you." I looked at him with genuine confusion, playing my role to perfection. "Marcus, I'm not sure what you're suggesting. Are you saying that I somehow orchestrated a federal investigation? That I manipulated the IRS and the university administration? That I forced you to commit fraud and embezzle grant money?" He took a step toward my car, and I could see the desperation in his eyes, the wild look of a man who'd lost everything. "You know exactly what you did. Somehow you found out about my mistakes and you used them to destroy me. You've been planning this for years." "Marcus," I said gently, my voice filled with concern, "I think you're giving me far too much credit. I'm just a graduate student, remember? Too unintelligent for original research. How could someone like me possibly orchestrate something so complex?" The words hit him like physical blows, his own assessment of my capabilities thrown back in his face. "Besides," I continued, my voice steady and calm, "I didn't make you commit fraud. I didn't make you steal other people's work. I didn't make you have affairs or embezzle money or destroy students' careers. I just stopped protecting you from the consequences of your own choices. You destroyed my life over a research paper," he said, his voice breaking with emotion. "Over hurt feelings. Was it worth it? Was destroying everything I worked for worth whatever satisfaction you got from your revenge?" I considered the question seriously, taking my time to formulate my response. "Marcus, do you remember what you told me about intelligence versus wisdom?" He frowned, not understanding where I was going with this. "You said intelligence was knowing how to manipulate people, how to exploit their trust, how to steal their work without leaving fingerprints. But wisdom was understanding that every action has consequences, even if those consequences take time to manifest." I watched his face change as he realized what I was saying, as the full scope of his situation became clear. "You taught me that lesson better than any textbook ever could. The beautiful thing about studying human behavior is that you learn how people really work. Not how they say they work, not how they want to work, but how they actually respond when they're under pressure." Marcus was shaking now, with rage and fear and the dawning realization of how completely he had been outmaneuvered. "You want to know if it was worth it? Every single moment. Not because of the revenge. Revenge is just a bonus. It was worth it because you taught me something invaluable about power and justice and the difference between intelligence and wisdom. No one will believe you orchestrated this," he said desperately, grasping for any hope. "I'll tell them you're crazy, that you've been stalking me, that you fabricated evidence." I smiled then, the first genuine smile I'd felt in years, warm and satisfied. "Go ahead. Try to convince them that a graduate student somehow manipulated federal agencies, university administrators, and your own wife into investigating you simultaneously. Try to explain how I managed to fabricate evidence that multiple independent sources verified. Try to make them believe that all of this was an elaborate revenge plot, orchestrated by someone you publicly dismissed as too unintelligent for original research." Marcus opened his mouth, then closed it again, realizing the impossibility of his situation. Because we both knew the truth. He had been brought down by his own actions, his own choices, his own arrogance. I had simply made sure that those choices caught up with him. You know what the most beautiful part is, Marcus? I didn't actually have to lie about anything. Every piece of evidence, every revelation, every consequence, it was all real. All I did was make sure the right people found out about it at the right time. I put my car in drive, preparing to leave him to contemplate his new reality. Oh, and Marcus? That research you stole from me? It's being published next month in the Journal of Applied Psychology. Under my name, of course. Turns out I am intelligent enough for original research. After all, I drove away, leaving him standing in his pajamas next to the foreclosure notice. In my rearview mirror, I watched him sink to his knees on his front lawn, finally broken. It should have felt like victory, like the culmination of years of careful planning. Instead, it felt like justice. Marcus Chen had spent his career teaching psychology, but he had never truly understood human nature. He believed power came from crushing others, from building yourself up by tearing others down. He assumed that because someone was kind, they were weak, that patience meant passivity. He was wrong about all of it. Real intelligence isn't about taking what others have built. It's about building something yourself that's so solid, so well constructed, that it can't be stolen or destroyed. Real power isn't about controlling others through fear. It's about having such complete control over your own life that other people's attempts to hurt you simply bounce off. And kindness isn't weakness. It's a choice that strong people make when they have the power to be cruel. I had learned all of this from Marcus, though not in the way he intended. He had taught me these lessons by showing me their opposites, by demonstrating what happened when intelligence became cunning, when power became cruelty. 6 months later, I received my PhD with highest honors. My dissertation was titled The Psychology of Academic Narcissism, a longitudinal case study. It was groundbreaking work that established new frameworks for understanding how toxic personalities function in institutional settings. The case study that formed the heart of the research was about a professor I called Subject M. It detailed his methods, his psychological profile, and the systematic way he had exploited students and colleagues over the course of his career. It also documented his eventual downfall, analyzing each step of the process that led from his peak influence to his complete professional destruction. The dissertation won 3 awards and led to job offers from every major university in the country. I accepted a position at Harvard, where I now run my own research lab focused on institutional psychology and the prevention of academic abuse. My work has led to new policies at universities across the nation, protecting students and junior faculty from exactly the kind of exploitation I had experienced. Marcus Chen, meanwhile, works at a community college in Ohio, teaching introductory psychology to freshmen who have no idea of his past. He makes less in a year than he used to spend on clothes, lives in a 1-bedroom apartment, and drives a 15-year-old Honda Civic. Sometimes I wonder if he's learned anything from his experience, if the fall from grace taught him humility, if he treats his students with respect now, or if he's just bitter about his circumstances. I hope he's learned, not for his sake, but for theirs. Because the students he teaches now deserve better than what I got. They deserve a professor who sees their potential instead of just opportunities for exploitation. They deserve someone who builds them up instead of tearing them down. They deserve what I never had, a mentor who actually cares about their success. But regardless of whether Marcus has learned his lesson, I know I've learned mine. I learned that intelligence without wisdom is just sophisticated stupidity. I learned that true strength comes from building others up, not tearing them down. I learned that the best revenge isn't destroying your enemies. It's succeeding so completely that they become irrelevant. Marcus showed me he was a predator who saw students as resources to be exploited. I believed him, and I planned accordingly. The funny thing is, Marcus was right about one thing. I am very good at following instructions. I followed his instructions about documenting everything carefully. I followed his instructions about understanding human psychology. I followed his instructions about the importance of long-term planning. I followed his instructions about how power really works in academic institutions. I was the perfect student. I learned everything he taught me. I just applied those lessons in ways he never expected. Because while Marcus understood manipulation, he never understood justice. While he grasped exploitation, he never grasped consequences. While he recognized intelligence, he never recognized wisdom. And that's why, in the end, the student surpassed the teacher, not through theft or fraud or exploitation, but through patience, planning, and the simple recognition that actions have consequences, even when those consequences take years to manifest, especially then. Today, I teach graduate students in my own research lab, and I make sure they understand what real mentorship looks like. And the first lesson I give them has nothing to do with statistics or methodology or research design. It's about ethics, about the responsibility that comes with knowledge and power, about the difference between intelligence and wisdom, about treating people with dignity, regardless of their position in the hierarchy. That real strength comes from lifting others up, not pushing them down. That the most important research they'll ever do is the work they do on themselves, understanding their own motivations and biases and capacity for both good and harm. Some of them look at me like I'm being overly sentimental. They're here to learn research methods, not life lessons. They want to get to the real work, the important work, the work that will advance their careers. I understand that impatience, because I used to feel it myself when I was in their position. But then I tell them about Professor X, about the case study that launched my career and changed my life, about the brilliant researcher who confused intelligence with manipulation, power with cruelty, success with exploitation, about how his career ended, not because he wasn't smart enough, but because he wasn't wise enough to understand that other people are human beings, not resources to be consumed. I tell them that Professor X made one crucial mistake that cost him everything. He assumed that because someone was kind, they were weak. He believed that because someone was patient, they were passive. He thought that because someone followed the rules, they couldn't play the game. He was wrong about all of it. And that's why, in the end, he lost everything. Not to someone more ruthless, but to someone more patient. Not to someone more manipulative, but to someone more principled. Not to someone who was willing to cheat, but to someone who was willing to work within the system to ensure that justice was served. My students listen to this story with the kind of attention they usually reserve for discussions of groundbreaking research. Because it is groundbreaking research, in its way. It's a longitudinal case study of what happens when intelligence operates without wisdom, when power operates without ethics, when success is pursued without regard for the human cost. And it's a demonstration of something that many of them have never considered, that doing the right thing isn't just morally superior to doing the wrong thing. It's also strategically superior, because people who build their success on the exploitation of others are always vulnerable to those others. They create enemies everywhere they go. They leave trails of resentment and anger and desire for justice. And eventually, inevitably, that catches up with them, not through some cosmic force of karma, but through the simple reality that other people remember how they've been treated. And some of those other people are patient enough to wait for the right moment to ensure that actions have consequences. Marcus taught me many things during my 3 years as his student, but the most important lesson was one he never intended to teach. He taught me that the best revenge isn't destroying your enemies. It's building something so beautiful, so solid, so undeniably valuable that your enemies become irrelevant. It's creating a life so successful, so meaningful, so full of genuine accomplishment that the people who once dismissed you become footnotes in your story. It's achieving everything they said you never could, not to spite them, but to prove to yourself that their assessment was wrong. Marcus called me worthless. He said, I lack the intelligence and creativity for original research. He claimed I would never amount to anything more than an adequate assistant. He was wrong about all of that, but he was right about one thing. I am very, very good at learning from my teachers, even when they're teaching me lessons they never intended to share. Today, I'm Dr. Sarah Martinez, professor of institutional psychology at Harvard University. My research has changed how universities handle academic misconduct. My work has protected countless students from the kind of exploitation I experienced. My lab has produced some of the most innovative research in the field of organizational psychology. I am successful, respected, and genuinely happy with my life. Marcus Chen teaches Introduction to Psychology at a community college in Ohio. He makes $35,000 a year. He lives alone in a studio apartment. He has no research budget, no graduate students, no influence in his field. He is forgotten by everyone except the people he hurt, and even most of them have moved on. Which one of us turned out to be worthless? The answer, I think, speaks for itself. The irony wasn't lost on me. He called me worthless. Now I was sitting at the table he tried to keep me away from, designing the systems he never understood, setting policies he would have broken, hiring women like me, smart, quiet, deliberate, capable of destruction, but choosing instead to build, until we're pushed too far. The world isn't fair, but it is programmable. And once you understand the code of power, you can rewrite it, not with vengeance, but with precision. You don't always have to burn the bridge. Sometimes you just remove one critical bolt and let gravity do the rest. So to Marcus, wherever you are, thank you. You showed me who I never want to become. You reminded me that dignity isn't something people give you. It's something you protect, quietly, fiercely, and absolutely. And if you're watching this, if you've ever been humiliated, silenced, or made to feel like you don't belong, just know you're not alone. And your silence is not your weakness. It's your storm, waiting, brewing, perfectly aimed. Thanks for watching. Drop a comment below if you've ever felt overlooked or underestimated. And if this channel speaks to you, subscribe. There's more coming, much more, because every system has a flaw. And sometimes the best revenge is knowing exactly where to insert the code.